Communion, dude. Okay. All right. Good? Okay. Yeah. Probably not yet. The great Oz controls all of that.
So I just leave it alone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's hands-free device here in Georgia. Yeah. Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Wow. Look next to you. Look the other direction. We have a room full of people who are not alike. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that lovely? That's where the richest conversations happen. So, I am so pleased that everybody is here today. My name is Duke Walker. I serve as the chaplain. I know most of you. 3 of my dearest pals in Gainesville today, all in the same space. I can't get over it. I have had lunch with all of them. I have admired their faith. I have allowed them to teach me in conversation, and I have learned from them about this gracious and generous God who loves us all so much. He says, I'm coming to the party. I'm going to be one of you. Thank you all for being so important to me and to our community. So, how many of you know this gentleman in the middle, Father Tim Hepburn? All right, there you go. This is not a vote. The voting season is over, folks. Get over it. All right, we're moving on. We are moving on. And how many of you know this gentleman on the far end, Father Stewart? Okay. All right.
But my Catholic people who know him are feeling kind of antsy, raising their hand.
Yes. And our friend on this end, Reverend Jamie Prickett. Yes? There you go. There you go. All right, y'all might need to be shouting Methodists, as they called you back in the day, like 1800s. They were shouting Methodists. We got a few more Episcopalians and Catholics here, but all good. Today, the visitation team, which is a group here at LVE who has a heart for friendly visits for those on campus who may have an increased risk for loneliness among us, co-sponsors this with the Spiritual Life Committee, who wants to make sure that everybody here knows a God who loves them uniquely and profoundly. So, we are pleased to welcome you, Pat Johnson, Sally Anderson, are both key people on the visitation team here at LVE. If you have any questions about that at the end of our time together, reach out to one of the 2 of them. And if you'd like to dip your toe in the kiddie pool and just try the waters, you can go to their next meeting. It's December 10th at 3 o'clock in the meeting room. So keep that in mind if you feel during this time that you also have a heart to come alongside people who might have an increased sense of loneliness in their life, to befriend them. So we'll get right to it. We have 3 questions for you today. I won't tell you who has the dunking button in the crowd. Right. So, but it's a very fun place that opens up underneath of the chancel when you get, well, it's a surprise. So, no, so I will also bring the mic around for you in between questions, because I know that questions stir up other questions and everybody has a unique perspective, so we want to hear from as many people as possible, whether it's related to the question on the screen or not. But let's jump right to it. I want to honor everybody's time. So, first question, and I'll read it out for you all. Question number 1. This is a real kind of logistics question, okay? Just kind of a nuts and bolts thing. So, how do you invite yourself to a visit of an individual who was referred to you by someone else. So the person who's going to be receiving the visit from you didn't ask for it. Sally saw you at lunch and said, you know what, Julie could really use a visit from you. How do you handle those kinds of scenarios?
I walk right up and I say, Sally called and she said you looked terrible. And she really thought it would be a good idea to call you. Just go straight in for it.
I have the same answer, sort of. I said, first, tell the truth. But I started to think about this. It also makes a difference whether the person that I'm visiting has their faculties or not. Mm-hmm. I have visited people here that were in memory care or something, and I was asked to visit them, and it wasn't the same kind of introduction. But if they have their faculties, I would say who I am. I would tell them why I'm there, and who asked me to come. I wouldn't say, she said you looked awful. The way I said it was I would give agency back to the person too and say, I'm here at somebody else's request, but would you like a visit? So they can also say, bye-bye.
Yeah, very similar, and usually it's a phone call first, as you know, so-and-so has mentioned you or name dropped, and so I'm just reaching out and love to come by and have a visit and just check in, have conversation, and gives them an opportunity to say yes or no, or I'm fine, don't need a visit, or whatever it might be. So, and then again, I agree with Father Tim that there's a situation where there's some memory issues, usually it's just a drop in and not even the connection with whoever invited, just a simple drop in.
The thing I thought about with this too was that assumptions have changed around pastoral visits just in general. I would love a show of hands. Who of you would find it very welcoming if your clergy person just dropped by your house completely unannounced? See, that's so, even in my time doing this, for 25 years, that's changed, I think. And I think that's, an important thing to get into the room, just on that level. Like, do you appreciate a phone call first? Or if we're just kind of in the neighborhood like last week, so we have a new nun at Grace. You've got to meet her, she's great. Yes, we have nuns. We have nuns too. And we took a risk and just stopped by. And you could feel with, a couple of the people, of course everyone was kind and gracious. No one was like, but I think that needs to be named too, just where we're all clear what that dynamic looks like.
I had one more little piece of this, and that is, this isn't a type of call you get at LVE, but it's somebody just called me and asked me to visit her son here in Gainesville. And he's got all kinds of psychological issues, and alcoholic and all these things. And, sometimes any counselor will tell you, you get best results if you get the person participating in their own healing. Mm-hmm. And so when the mom's calling me for her adult son, I'm going to want to shift that to the son and try to get the son to call me if he really wants help.
Yeah. I think another thing to name too is that I think sometimes we're surprised that people actually care about us so much that they would take the risk to reach out and suggest that a clergy person actually call. So, I'm thinking about moments when I've done this, and it actually is a very compassionate thing to tell someone when they say, how in the world did you know to call? Mm. And it's, and to see that in their eyes to say, oh, well, John reached out to me and to be honest, when he talked to you last week, he knew that you were going through a really hard time. And he took a risk to reach out to me, and I'm taking a risk to reach out to you. And a lot of, really healing can come from that. When you realize that, people in my parish, people in the hallway are actually paying attention to me. And they do actually care. So, I think that's a really important piece of it, too.
And I think practically, I think it's important. I think we'd all would agree. We appreciate when people reach out to say, I need you to check on so-and-so or this. Because, in today's world, it's hard sometimes to know, it happens every now and then, but somebody will put something on Facebook and they assume just because they put it on social media that somehow you saw that or that. But I don't see that. So I think, from a pastoral perspective, we appreciate when someone says, hey, do you mind checking on so-and-so? Because that helps us as well, just to do the ministry that God's called us to do.
Mm-hmm. The worst really is to get a call, though, and someone say, I need you to call her.
Because she's possessed.
Because, yeah.
And then we Methodists say, go see Father Tim.
Go see Father Tim. And then you say, and then say, but do not tell her that I told you. Yeah. And then you say, well, where's the door that you want me to walk through? And they say, oh, I don't know. That's up for you to figure out. I'm just letting you know. That's a very awkward
You just
spot.
blame it on the Holy Ghost.
You do. And just say, I woke up this morning and the first thing I thought was, I need to call John.
Never happened before ever in my life.
I know.
I thought of one more little story that was moving for me. And it had gone out of my mind because it was so long ago. But when I was in college, one of my best friends from high school got in a car accident and passed away. And my mom called the priest. And I wasn't really going to church in those days. She called the priest to the campus, and he came looking for me. And he found me where I lived and just said, your mom called. And it was the beginning of an open door for me in the church.
Good, so lively. What wonderful experience you have to share. Is there a question that comes up for you specifically related to this kind of dynamic? Before we move to our second question, I just want to be sure to check in with you, specifically related to this. If not, we'll have time at the end for questions as well. Okay. All right, let's go to our second question. They get progressively more difficult, so watch out if anybody looks to be hitting the button. Question number 2. How do you respond when an individual you're visiting with seems to get stuck in negativity? Some sort of negative loop in the story that they're sharing with you. How do you encounter that?
Smile a little, laugh a little.
I think you got to acknowledge, you acknowledge whatever it is that's causing the negativity. So let's give them permission to name it, to name whatever it is that they are, that's causing. But then also open-ended questions, I think is a good rule of thumb, is asking, some of those open-ended questions about, the kind of what's driving that negativity. I think that's a good start.
Mm-hmm. Could you give an example?
It's necessary for them to talk it through also. If they're being negative, they need to talk through the negativity.
Yes, ma'am. And that's really what I mean by, giving them permission to share whatever it is. Because most of the time, whatever we're expressing verbally, as long as if they have space to talk, you'll find out it's not always what's being said publicly. It's usually something behind that's causing that sort of negative approach.
Jamie, we live in a pretty binary world, either or kind of thinking. So when you say open-ended, what question, can you give us an example or two of what an open-ended question might be like?
I'm not leaving them.
Oh, it's getting serious. It's getting serious now, people.
I can't
Wait till the collar comes off.
So an open-ended question would be like, Stuart, tell me why you're needing to take your coat off.
Tim makes me nervous.
So I've got to my negativity. It's Tim. No.
I just thought of a personal example that happened to me when I was the negativity.
Okay.
And sometimes you do rely, I made a little joke about the Holy Ghost a second ago, but sometimes you really got to rely on the Holy Spirit. And so I was in spiritual direction, and I was the directee, I wasn't the director. And I was telling my spiritual director this and this and this, and all my parishioners that are here, they're like, what's so bad about our church that you were complaining so much? But he said, you know, I'm really hearing a lot of self-pity. Mm-hmm. And I almost said a bad word. But it was the right thing for him to say at that point. Mm-hmm. Other times, I was thinking about how useful the Psalms have been, because there's so much negativity, but almost every one of the negative ones ends up in something positive. And I was thinking of Psalm 142. See, he told us these questions beforehand, so I did have a little time to prepare. And this is when everything in King David's life is falling apart. And before the psalm, it says a maskil of David when he was in the cave. And you might remember the reason he was in the cave is Saul was chasing him, and he didn't feel like a king. Mm-hmm. He felt like everything was going wrong. And he says, the most poignant lines are, look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares about my life. That's negativity. But at the end, he's saying, set me free from my prison that I may praise your name. He comes to the place of, even in the midst of his pain, he begins to praise. So I think that's, you can help. I've been able to help people express their negative emotions or their pain, but also realize that God is still God in the heavens, and there's never not a reason to praise God.
See, I thought about Job with this question. I think about Job a lot. I think it's a very underutilized wisdom text for that reason. And if you think about the end of Job, there's this fascinating, and I don't like how with the lectionary cycle, like we pull different parts of it out and we look at this part of it this Sunday, because if you don't come to church, I know that you all do, but if you don't come to church for those 3 consecutive weeks, you don't actually see the full story. If you come on 1 week, you think the main point was Job having a chance to vent and say how horrible that his life was. If you come the next week, you think the main point was God putting Job in Job's place and telling Job, where were you? Where were you when this was all made? If you come the next week, you think the point was that Job got it all back. Well, Job didn't get it all back. Mm-hmm. Job's things were given back to Job, but it wasn't the same family. It wasn't the same things. So I think having all 3 of those weeks, I think, really means a lot to me, because you see, God gives us a space to say how we feel. And God doesn't back down from saying, here's the bigger point of view that fits in. And then we do have a chance for some sense of healing and wholeness on the closing of that. But we don't go back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, we don't go back. And it's not this, Pollyannish point of view to say, oh, it's all. And I think we get caught in this so often. We have these catchphrases that we use when we don't know what else to say.
Oh, don't be a negative Nelly.
Don't be a negative. Oh, it's just God's will. And God must have needed an angel. And, all of the, And every time I hear people say those, I really do. I reach out and I don't say a word. I hold their hand and I wait. And every single time, something will crack. And they will say what they really do feel, which is, this is awful. And so I think it always helps to, I mean, for me at least, to put it in that wider perspective. And I think the Jewish, faith is such a rich example of this, to fight, argue with God, engage with God, debate. I think sometimes we just want to be polite. Not any Episcopalians that I know, but,
I think it's good also to remember that when you're visiting someone, it's not necessarily your words they're looking for, it's simply your presence. Yeah. And so whatever engages you to be fully present with someone. And I think that's what we're looking for when you do a visit. So it's not necessarily the words that need to be spoken, it's just knowing that you're present there. And speaking of the Spirit, I think that's where the Holy Spirit does some of the Holy Spirit's greatest work, is when we choose to simply be present in that moment. So it's more about empathy than it is solutions. It's more about our answers. So it's just being present, I think, is really, but also I will say as someone who does visits, you also and us too, it's important to know our boundaries and your limits as well. Because we all know that negativity can rub off on others, right? So it's, I think, to understand what those and those boundaries as well, and be careful with that. Know yourself in those situations as well.
We have a question here.
The negativity, when it's connected to pain, the pain that's not going to go away, and the person doesn't want to get so much medication that they're not there. So, they're trying to live with the medication that's helping but not relieving, and they're in pain. Your comment just now answers part of that. Just being there, sometimes it's just really hard because you don't know how to help. Do you have any any of those common things that you say that, we go into prayer then, and that helps. But sometimes, and maybe I'm being selfish, maybe I'm being more focused on me than what my presence means. It's just sometimes really hard. And if you have anything that would help, that would be great.
I feel inclined to finish my story about being told that I was being, what did he call me? Self-pity. I forgot, the best part of that story is what it taught me. Because at first I was indignant that he would be saying, you shouldn't be sad about the things that make you sad. And that's really not what he was saying. He was saying you should grieve the things that should make you sad, like the loss of your health, like constant pain, like the loss of a loved one, like the loss of your mind, like all the many, many things that we lose. We have to grieve those things. Yeah. But it's another shift, and I think this is what my spiritual director was seeing, that I had started to walk in self-pity about those things rather than just grieve, because those aren't the same thing. Yeah. And so I think part of it, Pauline, is to give the person permission, and not even just permission, but encouragement to grieve what is grievable. But to do it you can do it, there's a way to do it in faith. That doesn't get into the either blaming God or other people for it, or yourself for it, or it doesn't get into entitlement or justification for me to be have bad behavior because I'm in pain.
Thank you. That's clarifying. That's a great question. How do you be with somebody when it's kind of ongoing? Stuart, you want to chime in on this?
Just a small thing. I think another important piece of this for me is to notice that in parishes we recreate family scripts. And I think that's another piece of it that popped up for me as well with this particular piece around. Sometimes if someone is in a negative loop, a kind of difficult truth is to kind of ferret out, that may have worked for them. That may have actually worked for them in their family system. And part of, the ongoing pastoral relationship is to actually tease that out a little bit, to say, every time I come and talk, you have shared, I noticed you have shared the last 4 times we've talked this same thing. What is that? So, and I think there's some deep, compassionate work that can come from that too, to kind of say, sometimes letting that go is actually a way to heal long-standing family narratives that sometimes can come out, and they need a place to go. They're like, gremlins. They want to go somewhere, and there's a reason that they've been there. And sometimes you can find a way to bless them and let them go.
Yeah, I was thinking this might just be a Catholic thing, but it also might be in other Christian faith traditions. But let me see if I've read this one right. Is that there's a theology in our church of redemptive suffering. And the way it gets on the popular level is when you're growing up in a family, when you're suffering, what are you supposed to do? Offer it up. You offer it up as a prayer for the poor souls in purgatory. Right? But that can also be, you're a bad Catholic if you're suffering and you don't offer it up. You don't just offer it up. If you actually really express your pain, then that's seen as like a less faithful way to handle suffering. So I think a lot of people have gotten that family narrative of just offer it up. Kind of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and
look at all that you have to work on. I know.
Yeah.
So I like all of this, and your comment, Jamie, about the open-ended questions, I think is really helpful. And I think, Stuart, you're also going this direction. The way I would paraphrase is stay curious. One of the things that I learned during the chaplain residency in Greenville was a term called cognitive grievers. And this is where, and most of the time this is men, but not exclusively. When they're grieving something, they will tell the same story over and over and over again, and often the same details. They may sound like they're in a negative loop, but they could actually just be getting the story out of them. So if you stay curious about what's being shared, something that's inside is stuck. It helps them to be able to offer it back into a relationship, which is where they can be unstuck. Because stuck folk tend to have isolated from their connectedness to others. Let's take a look at the last question. Yep.
I'd like to share an experience.
Hang on a second. Let me get you the mic. Just hold it close to you so we can hear it.
I'd like to share an experience when I read the question and then I heard the comments of the lady up front. I reflected back many years ago. I volunteered with a large hospital in Overland Park, Kansas, and they asked me to be a patient representative, and I had 2 floors. One was post-surgery, and the other was cancer and other types of illnesses. I'd been doing it for a while, very comfortable with it, I thought. I entered one lady's room one morning, and as I usually did, I said, "Good morning." I don't remember her name. Say, "Good morning, Ms. Smith. How are you feeling?" And she looked at me and very harshly said, I'm dying. That's how I'm doing. It caught me completely unprepared. I stepped back for a moment, and then I said, I'm so sorry. I'll let you rest. And I stood outside for several minutes just trying to compose myself before I went to the next room. And I thought, you need to be prepared for the answer to your question.
Yeah.
True.
Wow, that's a powerful story, David. Thank you for that honesty. Wow.
I'm dying.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
I think you learn pretty quick once you start doing the hospital, just how are you doing is usually not the intro line.
No, and then, and here's what I would have said, which would have been such a stupid thing to say. Well, I'll let you get back to it.
That's terrible.
It's the sense, so sometimes it's just a horrible, because we don't know what to say, like you said. What do you say? And you really have to do your own inner work and stay grounded, because when people come back and they're just honest about how they feel.
The best
How do you
book,
hold that?
the best book we got in the seminary was called "What to Say When You Don't Know What to Say," and the first chapter was nothing. Say nothing. But another example of this was when my father was going back for surgery, and I was already a priest, the guy who's supposed to know what to say. Right. But it's when it's your own parent, And I said, Dad, don't be afraid. God's with you, and we're praying for you. I'll see you on the other side. His eyes got big as golf balls. He's like, what? Not that other side, the other side of surgery. That's great. Oh, dear.
Oh, God. That's true.
The rotation that week.
It took me off.
Hilarious.
Right.
Good. Very good. Okay. All right. Here we go. Let me get the mic to you.
I just have a solution.
Oh, then let me definitely get the mic to you.
And
Here's a solution, folks.
oh, good.
This was a couple of years ago, but one Sunday afternoon, I got a phone call from somebody who was a friend, and I had been meeting her for lunch, and she was now in Willowbrook, and I'd been visiting, and she called and said, I need you to come see me. I'm dying. And I said, well, I'll come over tomorrow afternoon. She said, you can't come today? And I said, okay, I'll come today, and I'll be over there shortly. And I hung up the phone, I picked it up again, and I called Duke. I said, what do I do? So he was the solution. He told me, if she said such and such, call security, call me. But anyway, you helped me get through that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're calling you, Duke.
That's their answer.
Oh, Lord. Oh, goodness. Good. Yeah. Pat Guthrie. Just hold it close so we can hear you.
I just think, Jamie, when you said sometimes say nothing, that is so powerful sometimes, because a person's left with their own thoughts, of their negative thoughts, instead of trying to jump in and talk them out of it.
Yeah.
But that say nothing can be great.
Yeah, and it's hard, isn't it? I mean, we all have a tendency. We don't like that void that silence creates. So we feel like, particularly in those type of moments, I mean, we feel like we've got to. Did you watch that Braves game last night? Or we feel like we got to fill in that gap somehow. So I think having the courage to let silence speak, I think is what's important.
Which, this is a great segue to our third and final question from the great Oz back here. And that is, how do you help a conversation go deeper than the weather? Or a Braves game, all of our cultural idols that we like to hang on to and talk about that maybe keep us from going to deeper places. How do you, when you're in a visit with someone else, help them just get down a little bit deeper?
Questions, and more questions.
What kind of questions?
Well, even someone who lives here who really doesn't have trouble staying on the surface. She would go into stuff pretty quickly, but I do recall asking her, has it been difficult to give up this hobby, which is all over her room? Has it been difficult for you to have to let go of that? And that was an occasion to talk about something a little deeper than the baseball game or the weather.
And that's a great example of an open-ended question. I mean, I think that, because that allows for conversations to engage.
And I think it has to do with what the assumptions are. Like I'm thinking about on Sunday, the sermon I gave on Sunday was more pointed than some of my, and there was this curious moment at the end in the line where this one woman came up and said, we don't always want you to feel like you have to be serious. And I said, well, today just did not feel like the day for, like, you know, opening jokes. It didn't. So I think what our assumptions are, and this is a difficult thing. I think about my students, like, those are soft skills to read a room. And, you know, I think kind of undervalued empathy skills. I think all of that comes into play with this, like going deeper, because sometimes people do want something light to break it. And other times they really want to jump in the deep end of the pool. And how do you know the difference in those two? How do you discern that, you know?
So how do you discern that?
I feel. That's how, you know, but this gets to, you know, we're all kind of built in different ways. I tend, when I go to visit someone, to spend some time actually feeling. You know, do they look tense? Do their shoulders look tense? What am I feeling off of them? Are their lips pursed? You know, are they smiling when I walk in the room? Are they not smiling when I walk in the room? I mean, I think all of that is, you know, you know, in a sense, we read each other and we feel each other out. And I think that has a lot to do, and that's a very difficult thing to teach. It's a very, very hard thing to teach. And I think part of, you know, discernment with pastoral care is that. I mean, it's very hard. And sometimes you get it wrong. Sometimes I get it really wrong. You know, yeah, that's what I thought about was, how do you pay attention to that? You know, and how are those muscles that you can actually strengthen? Which I think is another way to think about it. And I think that they are. I think they are muscles that you can strengthen over time.
So listening for the affect of the person. Good. Anything else come to mind for you before we turn it back over to the floor?
I think it's important when you're trying to take a conversation to another level, to shape a conversation around someone's journey and not necessarily their beliefs. I think beliefs create a sense of a wall, because all of a sudden they've got to be more direct. Where if you're doing, well, tell me about your childhood, or tell me about your experience. What got you here? What got you to this place? Or, you know, and that's a sort of a lead-in question that really directs around, because life is that journey, and we care, and our beliefs are shaped and formed as we go along that journey. So I think it's important that we stay focused on that, and then that tells us a lot about the beliefs that people hold based on the journey of their story they tell us. Does that make sense? So I think that's important as well.
Story.
Well, and the experience of a person has a unique sense of authority to it. It reconnects them to a sense of their confidence, whether the story is good, bad, or ugly. They know that story.
Exactly.
So I like this idea of shifting them from doctrine to experience. I mean, doctrine can be healing, a conduit of healing, but if we get them back to the experience, that's.
You know, we have
hang on. We're recording it, so we want to be sure to get
I'm
it.
sorry. We have bios here at LVE. And if you're visiting anybody in OBT or Willowbrook, go to the bios. There's one in East, there's one in West, there's one in OBT and Willowbrook. I went to Nancy Baumberger and found out that she was she cooked a pound cake. I got her pound cake recipe yesterday. But she was famous for her pound cake. But that was all in her bio, and she was also made an American of history. So it was really important to take her to the service yesterday. But those bios have so much information that you can go to and start a conversation.
You know, another thing that I'm going to take a risk and say is I've find myself doing more and more work around embodiment, because I think one of my shortfalls has been thinking about things too much, or always approaching things as though I'm thinking about them. And you may not have heard of this, or you may have the heart math work. Have any of you heard of the heart math work? So sitting in a room like this for 30 or 45 minutes, if there were sensors placed on all of our chests, our heart rhythms all become in tune with each other. And we pay no attention to this. So, and I think it's a hugely untapped part of what it means to be a human being in a, community. I mean, and there's wonderful work done, not just in that field, but in other, comparable fields. And I think if we paid more attention to that, to your point, like we get so stuck in our heads sometimes and think, that we want answers, when I'm not sure that answers are what we always want. I think we want a deeper felt experience, assurance, that comes much more for me with being embodied than it does with sitting down and writing things out or feeling like there's a black and white piece of this. And the heart math work has been fascinating to look at, to say, and we know this. We know when we walk in a room and we don't want to stay there. Or we know when we walk in a room and we meet a person who we've never met and we look up and we've talked for an hour. And we can't really explain why you feel certain things with certain. So I think part of this, I don't know that you can teach it, but I think you can honor it. I think you can honor it and really see that we are such incarnated beings. And I think that's fascinating.
I have a question here in front row. Farrell?
A couple of ideas related to this question to help get a conversation deeper. First, there has to be trust in the relationship. And that may not be able to be accomplished in one meeting. The other thing, if you have that trust, if you can reflect the feeling or show an understanding of what is said by the other person, that can help get deeper.
Good.
I've had the experience of deeper too fast, or sometimes just by the nature of Catholic dress and sacraments. When I was growing up in the Catholic Church, I learned there was 7 sacraments, and one of them was called extra munction. You got your munction and you got your extra munction. But that wasn't, I was misunderstanding the word. It was extreme unction.
Conjunction, junction,
Which
function.
Conjunction, and what people call it in more common terms is last rites.
Yeah.
And so there's a whole thing to be discovered about how do we get from 2 verses, one in Mark and one in James, about anointing with oil for healing, how did that come about to dying? So sometimes people feel forced to go deep when the priest walks in the room because you're about to give them extra unction.
Extra unction.
And they're like, I'm not ready for extra unction. You know, I'm hoping for healing. I want some healing.
I'm fine with the regular unction. Thank you very much.
But the other one is like the overzealous evangelical who realize that this person only has 2 more days to get saved. And so they try to take it deep into their faith, you know, right there at the last, and the person feels pressure to receive Jesus as their Lord. Maybe they already have, or maybe whatever, but it's just, you know, there's times when you can't press that kind of thing. Maybe most of the time you shouldn't press that kind of thing.
Oh, I think so.
I think also, in with what Father Tim, I think it's good to name somebody where they're at in their faith also. Like, I see your faith in this. Sometimes, because if you're in that chronic pain or in that chronic, I mean, sometimes we can't even see the faith that we've been carrying because the pain and the hurt or the whatever, the grief might still be overlaying that. So I think sometimes it's a good word to say, you know, I've seen your faith. I've seen you live out your faith. And I just want to name that for you. And so sometimes I think that's good as well for people to help them. And that begins to help them see their faith in light of whatever that pain, grief, or chronic pain might be.
Good. Yep. Question here, D.
Not exactly.
Comment, yeah.
I want to go back to this thing of silence and heart math. I've done work at heart math. And in heart math, one of the things, and we have a lot of ideas of how we get deeper in conversations, but we have to come back to ourselves. Has to start here. And in heart math, you're trained to start in your heart, not in your head. You drop in your heart, you breathe from your heart, and you stay there until you're in your heart. So you are, as you said, you're embodied. You're embodied in your heart. You've dropped out of your head, and you're now in your heart. Many times, especially if I'm in a difficult situation, I'll just place my hand on my heart to remind myself where we are, and I just breathe in the heart. And then you're taught in the second step to bring, it's like having a higher mind. You have higher, more, what I kind of think about, divine level thoughts of peace, of quiet joy, of love, of gratitude, these kind of emotional feelings. And how does it feel to have peace? How does it feel to have just quiet joy? How does it feel to have love for all? And from that, you've then connected your mind, your higher mind, to your heart. And from there, you radiate that out into the room or to the person that is having a difficult time. And you haven't given them any advice. You haven't done anything. You're just now radiating this peace for them, and it fills the room. And their heart will begin to entrain where you have set the level of energy for that room. And we have to get back to being comfortable with silence. Yes. And we're not comfortable. As human beings, what do we want to do? We want to chatter. We want to talk. We want to distract our minds, distract our hearts. But we got to get used to just being silent.
Thank you, Dee. Any other questions, Sandy? Just hold it close.
Well, I'm going the other direction, but I was visiting with somebody who wanted a deeper conversation with their grandchild. And they were asking me that question. I know my grandchildren are in another world for me, but I didn't know how to answer it. They wanted to not just talk about the weather with their grandchildren. And I thought that was something that stumped me.
So let me see if I'm understanding this. Yeah, so I think the question, you were visiting with someone and they were expressing that they wanted a deeper conversation with their grandchild. And you didn't know how to respond to that need that they were expressing, that desire. Let's hear it, man.
I think you're going to have those conversations more and more as we move into more of a post-Christian kind of landscape. But again, I think it goes back to talking about experience. I think, you're not going to argue your grandchild into the faith. That's just not a reality, right? It's not possible to do that. So I think it's through experience. I think it's through witness of your presence and the vulnerability of your own story. I can tell you, I'm where I'm at today because of my grandfather, but it was through how he lived out his faith and gave witness to his faith, not really any of his words or anything that he tried to convince me that Christianity was true or right or whatever it might be, but it was through his lived experience. So I think when it comes to I've had this come up often with folks who are concerned about, their grandchildren or children and where they're at in their faith. And part of what I tell people is it is how you live it out in front of them that matters. And again, trusting that the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, takes those opportunities and plants seeds of faith in those individuals' lives. But to be willing when those questions come to you, be willing to engage those questions about faith and witness, and do it so in a story form, not in a didactic form, but more in a story form, I think is important.
And I think so. Our daughter is 17; she'll be 18 in 6 weeks. Oh my God! And I think about this a lot with her. To your point around where kids are right now, and I think they know that they're utterly distracted. I think they know that. I think they feel trapped. And to your point, I think one of the best things that we can do is actually to embody a different way of being. So I think, and this really calls for, using our imaginations. So one of the things that we did with her was actually write. So it was something that my grandmother did with me. My grandmother wrote me letters that forced me to pause at that point in my life and put down what I was doing and read the letter that my grandmother wrote me. And I don't think I would have had a conversation talking with my grandmother about the things that we wrote each other. And I kept those letters, and now they're all framed on my wall in our home. So I think finding a way to use our, imaginations and just naming out loud, like we've been saying, naming some of the truths out loud to say, we're all trapped. But it's really it's not a different thing from whenever I fought to get my own phone in my bedroom. When I got my own phone in my bedroom and I was like, 16 years old, my parents didn't see me for a long time. So,
But they were listening on the other phone.
But they were listening on the other side. So I think finding ways to name what needs to be named, to go back to like the list of what we've kind of said, what needs to be named, how do you read a room, how do you feel that way out, and how can you use your imagination, and what might that look like?
Well, your answer made me think how important that is, to help people to remember that the way that they learned to communicate in the past wasn't such a bad thing. And it made me think of when my mom had talked all she could, yelled all she could, spanked for a certain part of our lives, and she couldn't change our behavior. I would get this letter on my dresser that just had my name in her handwriting, Tim, and she would tell me how she knew me better than I knew me. She knew that the way I was acting was not the way that I even wanted to act, and how I was destined for better things. And I would have to pause and read that letter, and made a huge impact.
Huge impact.
We have two more questions, and I think we're going to begin our initial descent. So, Winnell?
Mine is not a question, but just an additional comment to this situation. Many of our grandchildren no longer live in this area.
Yeah.
And so that adds a different thing to the whole equation. You really do have to use your imagination and all sorts of things to communicate with them.
You also have to get on Instagram and X.
So, just a little spoiler alert here for everybody on this question of grandparents and grandchildren. We're in the phase of developing another offering for doing your spiritual autobiography. So this can be part of your inheritance, written for your grandkids to pick up and engage you in a conversation, maybe directly, maybe through prayer in their own lives. But that will be probably somewhere around the turn of the year. And so be looking for that as an opportunity.
I'd like to go back to question 1. And all your responses were, someone contacted you. I'm an independent resident here. When I go to Willowbrook, just to see someone that I may not know, how do you approach them? Because I've talked to a couple of them in Willowbrook, and their one constant thing is, it's so lonely. How does a independent resident here approach that without having anyone proposing it or visiting with them to begin with?
So you're talking about just a total stranger. Well, I have to say.
A fellow resident, so she's not a total stranger.
Right. That's what I'm thinking.
But frequently, the visitation team will assign us somebody who needs a visit.
You might be able to
And you've never met them. You just have her name.
I'm going to get Pat Johnson to comment a little further on that to stir y'all's thinking on it.
When we began the visitation team, one of the very first sessions we had was called The First Hello. And it's the ways, and some of you have alluded to the different ways you begin a conversation, reading the room, going in, introducing yourself, saying who you are, asking if they have a few minutes, if they'd like to chat. Just the casual ways that you would normally start a conversation with any individual. Someone that you were having lunch with, dinner with, someone you walked up to in a line someplace here waiting for something. To take a little bit of the hesitation out when you're going to somebody's room and you've never been there before and you don't know them really well, but you have a heart for visiting and a heart for being with them when they're lonely. So if you come to visitation team, we do have some sessions where we have a lot of workshopping around that. So you're welcome to come.
Great.
Maybe and also to add to what you're saying, I think you sort of said it, was give the person real permission that now's not a good time.
Yeah.
I think in that light too, just as a practical thing, I'm talking about reading the room. I think it's really important. We've all had those visits where like, is he ever going to leave? So I think, we may not say it out loud, but we're thinking it. So I think promptness and I guess you want to leave thinking, man, I wish you would have stayed a little longer. I wish, or you want to leave a situation where people are looking forward to your next visit, not like, well, when they see your number show up on the phone, it's like, I'm not
They wake
available
up the
today.
next morning and you're standing in the kitchen. Good morning.
Good. Well, thank you so much for coming out. I want to be sure to honor their time and your time. We committed to 3 to 4, and we're at 4 o'clock. But would you please with me give a round of thanks for our friends? So I want to tell you one little story. A Catholic priest, an Episcopal, and a Methodist all walking. No. Okay. Thanks, everybody. If you would like to go to the next visitation team meeting to explore this any further, reach out to Pat Johnson, Sally Anderson. They meet on December 10th at 3 p.m. in the meeting room. I know they have about 15 people already, and they could welcome more. Thanks for coming out. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.